So when it comes to reducing noise and sound transfer between walls, there's essentially two ways we can approach it. We can either add mass, so we can add heavy and dense materials to the surface in an attempt to absorb some of that nuisance sound that's coming through. Or we can add space. And on this particular project, we've kind of used both of those systems. The mass being in the acoustic plasterboard, which was a fairly dense and heavy plasterboard when compared to a 12.5mm standard plasterboard, for example, which has a dB rating of around 20 or 25. An acoustic plasterboard, such as the sound block, which is this one that we've used, has a dB rating, in other words a decibel rating, of around 36, between 36 and 38. So it's significantly better for sound reduction than a standard plasterboard. And you could recognise the acoustic plasterboard by its colour, which is typically blue. And again, the issue we had here on this particular job was conversation, telephone conversation, sound coming through this partition. So we added space in the way of a 50mm air cavity between the old existing stud partition, which was made up of 3x2 timber and some hardboard. So wasn't really performing too well when it comes to the sound reduction, because materials like that aren't going to absorb any sound whatsoever because there's no mass, and with it being so thin there's no space. So we made use of a 50mm cavity in the recess, and we've infilled that cavity with 4x2 timbers because the 3x2 timbers were spaced out too far apart, and therefore they wouldn't carry the 12.5mm acoustic plasterboard because we need a fixing point at every 16 inches. So I've added the 4x2 timbers in for structural reasons. We've infilled between those timbers using a 50mm sound slab by Rockwool, and then we've added our acoustic plasterboard over the top. Now you can add double layers of acoustic board, guys, which you might have seen before. That will of course further help to reduce sound. However, in this particular project, like I showed before, we were restricted by a few different things up top there, which is why we didn't want to add another 12 or 15mm onto this wall. And with all those materials and factors combined, the air pocket, the Rockwool sound slab, and the 12.5mm sound block board, we've managed to achieve a decibel reduction of around 52. If you remember, some of you that have watched previous videos of mine, you might remember that we tend to go for a soundboard 4, which is a Slimline sound panel, when we're doing our domestic jobs and residential jobs, where the customer might have issues with nuisance sound from noisy neighbours through a party wall or through alcoves typically. And the reason that we don't use a system like this, although you can, is to do with the loss of floor space. And the soundboard 4 Slimline sound panel is only 30mm thick, whereas this system, with the 4x2 timber and the sound block board, if you were to double skin with the sound block board, which we normally would if we weren't restricted, you're talking 130mm, so 100mm more than the soundboard 4. And the dB reductions are about the same. But for a partition between rooms, on the stud partition, you could opt for this system. You can also screw fix soundboard 4 to a stud partition as long as it's structurally sound, using a 4x2 timber or a metal frame stud system, or a decoupling system would be absolutely fine for the soundboard 4. Now, if floor space allows, and you can add a cavity between 2 stud partitions of say 100mm or more, even without any sound insulation materials fixed to those timber studs, even if you just use standard plasterboard, that cavity alone will significantly help to reduce sound transfer, because you've got a decoupled system, 2 separate walls, and you've also got the 100mm of air pocket between the 2 stud walls. So that is also a good system to use. And of course, infill that cavity with rock wool sound slab, clad the walls with either a sound block board or a soundboard 4, and you're going to enhance that system even more. So I hope this information has been helpful for you today. And remember, if you do live in the Coventry Warwickshire area and you're looking for a no obligation quote on a soundproofing system like this one, or if you have noisy neighbours through adjoining walls, use the link below to arrange a free survey, and we'll see you on the next video.